Welcome to Divine Intervention, 365 Days of World Building, Day 6. Today we're going to jump back in and start talking about the before Pact timeline that we got distracted from yesterday. So yesterday we went over how the tribes of the valley came together. And we also talked about how, because of that great war, the Everfolk ended up coming together, and the completion of that war with the Day of the Dray. Or the start of the completion of the war with the Day of Dray. We also have... We kind of talked a little bit about the War of the Magic. The War of the Magic was ended in 3466, and on day 4, we kind of talked about how, like, the Astral Nation was ahead of everybody else. So they kind of more... They were in the timeline of, like, civilized thinking. They were ahead of each other, and they had kingdoms and everything. And the War of the Magic, when they ended that, they all came together under one kingdom. So the next thing we want to talk about is we'll talk about the Hoarfrost Nation. And they were a lot of close-knit settlements that were up in the Winterlands. And they, because of the mentality of the worshippers of Fi'jat, about that like the endurance and the ability that they'd rather do things by themselves than in groups. A lot of their settlements were just like far apart from each other. Nobody asked for help. It wasn't like the Everfolk who, when trouble started happening, they started like running together into big groups. Hoarfrost people, they just keep to themselves. So what ended up bringing them together was, whether it was by choice or by action, there it was the Fury of Fi'jat, and it's basically from 3228 before Pact to 3031 was this, just all the Winterlands was in just a tremendous like blizzard, just straight out. And what happened was a lot of the clans ended up coming together, and over those couple hundred years, they ended up carving out what is now known as Hoarfrost. The Hoarfrost capital. So let's see. The Hoarfrost capital is this big kind of like just massive stone city. And it's basically was carved out of a mountain. And so what it is the original settlers, they came together. They formed this. They started carving out the top, and then as more and more worshippers of Fi'jat came together to survive the Fury of Fi'jat, they kept carving out lower levels and lower levels until they have basically the Hoarfrost capital. The Hoarfrost capital is this pretty unique center to Hoarfrost, because like I said, they're usually kind of distant from each other, but whenever there's a great blizzard or Fi'jat's just pissed off and doesn't like them, they all kind of like migrate to Hoarfrost. One of the things that they do in like our current timeline is every like decade or so they have a festival of Fi'jat where everybody travels there and worships Fi'jat together, and they go through all these rituals, and one of the rituals is basically the retrieval of Hoarfrost, which Hoarfrost is these trees that grow, and they're combined with the white Vesper essence, but there's these trees, and if it wasn't for the fact of how cold it was and that they're surrounded by snow, they would just like explode. They're wicked explosive. So the only reason that they're still like solid and in tree form is because of like it's always snowing in winter up there. And so during this festival, they get these giant parties together, and they go out and like they have a shaman who has been trained to like ritually extract it and carry it out. And basically this is how they stay warm in the giant blizzards, is they bring back Hoarfrost, and they have this giant like fire in the center of it, and they have pyro ducts that heat the entire capital of Hoarfrost. And so them all coming together and creating this capital is kind of what was the catalyst for them becoming the Hoarfrost Nation. And them deciding that even though, you know, they'd all rather like fight each other to see who was the best or like the toughest, that like went together, they could all, you know, they were the toughest nation. And so they kind of came together underneath that. The next nation I want to talk about is the Protectors of the Blade. And one of the reasons they're called Protectors of the Blade is because the event that kind of brought them together was Fogan Finn demanded a sword. And he reached out to all these different sects that worshipped him. And something that I don't know if we've covered, but like a lot of these, they worship the same god, but they all had different names for him. They all had like different ways of thinking of them. And when they started coming underneath the same nation, they realized that like they were all worshiping the same guy. So anyways, Fogan Finn reaches out to everybody and he wants them to make him this blade. But Fogan Finn is this giant fire elemental. And so they start forging the blade in 3132. No, that can't be right. Hold on a second. One of these is wrong. That doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, 3132. So they start forging, they start building the forge. They don't even start making the sword in 3132. They start building the forge, which is the Fogan Finn fortress that you see in the opening and the intro. And basically, it takes the entire nation to build. It takes the entire nation to build the sword. Between mining all the material enough for the sword, between all the forging, it doesn't end until 2637. And that's when they're finally able to create the blade that was worthy enough for Fogan Finn. And so at that point, there had been so much intertrade and so much teamwork, and they had basically had to build all this infrastructure over the hundreds of years, roads and everything like that, that at the end of it, they all united underneath the title Protectors of the Blade. Kind of as like a, you know, this was our accomplishment. We need to protect the blade for when Fogan Finn needs it. So that's all of them except for the Wanderers of the Unseen. Now, the Wanderers of the Unseen are water nomads. They're always on the move. They love their ships. There's really no reason to come together. And then they did. So their capital that we've kind of like seen in some of the other ones is called Risenhall. And Risenhall was originally 4 or 5 ships that were lashed together. So there was this treasure hunting adventure party that went out, and they ended up getting shipwrecked. And they were on this island, and they were getting low on food and everything. And so as a last ditch effort, they lashed all the broken ship pieces that they had together. And they just set out in the sea and prayed to the unseen. And as they started to find people, and actually, so what ended up happening was they had no issue, and they started like going around. You can see it here, like this. Well, actually, this is a bad map, but the path's like this, and so they're drifting through the ocean, and they come across this tight knit group of wanderers, and the wanderers come up and they port with them, and they hang out, and as they're hanging out, other wanderers see them, and so you start to get all these like boats start to pile up on these shipwrecks until you had like 50-60 boats together. And at that point, word started to spread. I guess I should mention, so we'll talk about it later on when we talk about Risenhall, but like one of the members of the captain was like a pretty well-known leader and adventurer. So when they were found, there was like a party started to go on, and it started to just like word of mouth traveled really quickly. And the more and more people found out about it, the more that they were just like getting in their ships and coming to lash onto Risenhall. And so what ends up happening is it's kind of hard to describe, but the Wanderers are like really carefree. They kind of just go with the wind. They go where they needed to be. They just like nothing really irritates them. Carefree spirits, everything. So what ends up happening is like hundreds and hundreds of boats end up coming and docking on Risenhall, to the point where like ships in the center start getting blocked in and they can't get out. And so they just keep continuing partying. Some ships open up stores to sell their wares. A bunch of them become pubs, restaurants. This whole like city starts to grow within Risenhall. And basically they end up partying for like 200 years. Just flat out. No, that can't be right either. What's that? Yeah, I thought that was more. Where as we do this series, I'm working on all these stuff. So, yeah. So yeah, over like 400 years, they basically like party. The Risenhall just grows and grows through pure like magic and the will of the unseen. This thing doesn't sink at all. You have people who come and like people are born at Risenhall and never leave, and then the next generation ends up opening like a hole in that like side of ports, and you're able to get out and go adventure again, or you just take a job on another boat and leave. And basically, that's how the Wanderers came together. It was like a 400-year party where they just like continuously just got smashed, and the whole thing revolved around these central 5 ships. And over those course of those 400 years, they ended up through chance basically building an altar to the unseen, and that's where the Conduit resides nowadays. So that basically covers how those 6 nations decided to become those 6 nations. And then tomorrow we'll start talking about how the pact came together, whose idea it was, maybe kind of hint at why, and then we'll talk about like everything that went into trying to get all the nations together and be nice to each other. All right, thank you for listening. Bye.